Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I wish you all are having an enjoyable and pleasant stay here at Jakarta. As we are about to start, I do hope that you are comfortably seated so that our agenda for this morning can run smoothly. Your Excellencies, Director of Islamic University of Indonesia, Professor Hikmahanto, Professor Lee, respected chairpersons, all speakers and participants, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2018 DILA Academy and Workshop, State Practice in International Law in Asian States in the year of 2017. To initiate our meeting this morning, we will begin with welcome addresses. For the first welcome address, I'd like to invite Mr. Nanang Sutrisno to deliver the first speech for this morning. Time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Honorable Professor Hikmahanto, Professor Uli, and all participants. I'm sorry for being late. Today, this morning, I got Sunday syndrome. Welcome back again to the conference, and in the second day we will have academy meeting and also a workshop. Actually, I have another program in my university because today there is a special program, but I am interested more to come to this meeting because since yesterday the topics of this conference make me comfortable and also make me motivated again to be academia, because years and years I always hold the position as administrators. So it's very rare for me to be an academia. So I'm interested more in coming in this event. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that last night you explored Yogyakarta and this Malioboro. And this morning I hope that you have already been fresh, yeah, and we will have the meetings related to academy and also workshop. I hope that after this meeting we will have an initiative to establish, for example, DILA Indonesia, and also to broach our cooperation, not only conference but also maybe research and also exchange of lecturers. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome back to this seminar, the meeting, and enjoy the meeting. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Mr. Nandan Sukrishno. Next, I'd like to invite Professor Rikmanto Juwana to deliver the second welcome address. To Professor Rikmanto, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I would like to convey my thanks to you all because you have stayed since yesterday and today. Today is going to be our last day, and today it is not on conference, the DILA conference, but this is we have been running this traditionally what we call as DILA Academy, and now and workshop. Now the DILA Academy, usually we have students who are interested in international law, and we would like them to understand more on international law by having the benefit of foreign speakers in a certain university. But unfortunately, because this is Sunday, and Sunday probably in any university, the students are very reluctant to go to campus, except if you said that you will get a C, and then they will come. Nonetheless, we still have this, through our tradition to have the DILA Academy. And we are thankful that the topic of the DILA Academy is to discuss on state practice, something that my colleague Sekou has mentioned to you all. And we will try to, of course, discuss issue of each jurisdiction on a certain year state practice. And this is where we will discuss the state practice in 2017 by various foreign speakers, including also from Indonesia. We hope that we can draw something out of that state practice. And we, of course, will have the state practice put in the, if it is possible, the Asian Yearbook of International Law, because there is this section where there is a discussion on the state practice of certain year. So I look forward to hearing from you all. And of course, I will also with my colleague from Atmajaya University, Ibu Ratna Juwita, to discuss on the state practice of 2017. I hope that Ibu Ratna will explore more rather than myself, because because I almost forgot what happened in 2017 because of my old age. In any case, again, I hope that we will have a productive session today and contribute to the, apart from knowing each other jurisdiction, but also to the Asian Yearbook of International. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Next, I'd like to welcome Professor Lee Sokwo to deliver the last welcoming address.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
It's better than yesterday. Selamat pagi. Apa kabar?
Baik.
Thank you. Hey, good morning, everyone. Again, as our colleague, described what is the DILA Academy and Workshop. The main idea of the DILA Academy is for the students, and as he mentioned that usually today is a Sunday, so it's quite difficult to ask the students to come. But I usually go to school on weekend because there's no students. It's a very good for the teachers to focus on what they want to research. Did it take to YouTube?
Yes.
I canceled what I say before. I go to school almost every day, including the weekend. And usually, this is, I believe that the main contribution of DILA to the community of the international Asia is that we touch upon the various step practice in previous years. And then the working on the paper, and the paper will be published in the next coming yearbook. And usually we do have about 10 to 12 the speakers around our member state of the DILA, so that we have to know that even very briefly what is the certain issues of the specific countries. Very unfortunately, we miss many of our colleagues. This is very unfortunate this time. Every school, every university has a different schedule. I believe that the time is a bit different for them to be able to travel to this year. But hoping that since, as we make an announcement yesterday, the next year we hold the 30th anniversary DILA conference in University of Indonesia in Jakarta. And the main topic, the main theme of the conference is the grand anatomy of the step practice in Asia over the last 30 years. So past, present, and the future. So that you will have a chance to know that all kinds of step practice of international law in each state in Asia, and so that you have a chance to know that what kinds of contribution they make, or they made, what they are going to make. So that hoping that, although I believe that our schedule to today's program will be shorter than the program, but hoping that we have a chance to learn that state practice of the participant for this conference. So likewise, what I talked yesterday, I'm very much on behalf of the Korean delegates of the DILA, I would like to thank all the members who support our program today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. Ladies and gentlemen, running precisely on time, without further ado, let us begin the fifth session for today on state practice in international law in Korea. I'd like to welcome Mr. Dodi Istiawan Nur Haryanto to act as the chairperson for this fifth session. To Mr. Dodi Istiawan Nur Haryanto, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Annyeonghaseyo again. Thank you very much. So good morning, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed the pleasant situation in Yogyakarta. As a brief, short introduction, our hotel is located in the Malioboro Street. So if you know the word of Marlborough, so this is the center of the business, which is like in New York, we know, I don't know how, yeah. So Yogyakarta was created in the long years ago, in the 17th century. And then if you go to the southern part, you will find the Keraton Yogyakarta. So this is the palace, the king's palace of Sri Sultan Hamengkubuwono X and our governor. And if you go to the north, you will find the mountain of Merapi. So the northern part of this city, you will find the beach of Parangtritis. So the northern part, the southern part is the beach, and then the northern part is the mountain. So this is the symbol of fire, And then the beach itself is the symbol of water. So we call it Yogyakarta Berhati Nyaman. So we have a common proverb that our city has a very calm and good weather situation for a person to get a relief from stress. So I do hope that you get relief from the stress. So thank you very much for the opportunity, because Professor Hikmahanto Juara will teach to our university this morning. So I will be the chairperson for this session, State Practice in International Law in Korea. So I would like to ask Ms. Professor Boon Suk Baek to come. He is the Assistant Professor, College of International Studies, Kyunhee University, Korea, and he will speak about the state practice in international law in Korea in 2017. So, Professor Sokule, please come to the floor. He is a professor of international law. He's very well known in High University Law School of Korea, and co-editor-in-chief the ASEAN New Book of International Law. And he will speak about the progress and challenges for maritime boundary delimitation between China and Korea. And then we would like to ask Professor Serian Lee. Yeah. She is a professor, School of Law, Chonbuk, National University of Korea. She will speak about refugee and humanitarian crisis, paving the way for refugee protection in East Asia. So, for each speaker, we have you have the time around 10 to 15 minutes, and after that we will have a brief discussion. So, I would like to ask Professor Baek as the first speaker. The time and place is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. And thank you very much for the conference for DILA Indonesia and also DILA Korea. So I'd like to very briefly review some of the major decisions related to international law in Korea and some of the legislation that adopted or amended in Korea, also related to international law. First, the case that I want to introduce to you is the decision of Supreme Court of Republic of Korea concerning the revocation of denial of refugee status, which was decided on July 11th, 2017. So one of the main issues in this case is whether same-sex orientation constitutes within the meaning of Article 2, Paragraph 1 of Refugee Act. Actually, the Refugee Act that was adopted in 2013 in Korea is one of the first legislation on refugee issues in Asian countries. So Article 2 of Refugee Act stipulates that, quote, a refugee refers an alien who is unable or unwilling to avail him or herself of the protection of his or her country of nationality owing to a well-founded fear of being prosecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, and membership of a particular social group or political opinion. So, taking into account the Refugee Convention in 1951 and its protocol in 1967, the Supreme Court ruled that the particular social group on Refugee Act in Article 2 means a group of individuals who form a separate group which is perceived by a society as being distinct. Here, same-sex orientation can be deemed to constitute a particular social group when as same-sex orientation renounced the moral norms prevailing in the refugee applicant's country of origin. Its disclosure would readily expose the applicant to persecution and the government of his or her country of origin refuse or is unable to offer protection. So that was the main issue, whether the same-sex orientation can be deemed to constitute a particular social group or not. And regarding the definition of persecution, court also maintained that if the disclosed same-sex orientation would like to expose the applicant to only antipathy and social reproach from family, friends, and general public for its contravention of moral norms in the country of origin, that it may constitute the unfair social constraint, but not persecution per se, if you in the refugee convention. But if the risk to which the refugee applicant is likely to expose due to same-sex orientation exceeds the ordinary level of social reproach to reach the level of serious infringement or discrimination against inherent human dignity, including threat to life, liberty, or security of the person, then these acts would constitute persecution. So in this case, the court confirmed that the plaintiff has neither disclosed his sexual orientation nor actively engaged in related activities, and also he has never subject to specific persecution on account of his homosexuality before. Therefore, the case was remanded. However, the acknowledgement by this court, Supreme Court in Korea, that same-sex orientation constitutes a particular social group within the meaning of the refugee in Refugee Act is a meaningful development for the protection of the human rights of LGBT individuals in Korea. Actually, this city, Yogyakarta, is also some linked to this decision that I introduced, in a sense that Yogyakarta principle, which was adopted in 2006, especially Principle 23, the right to seek asylum, is in the same line with the decision that was issued in July 11, 2017, the decision that I just introduced. I will move on to the second decision. That decision is related to murder. So the fact of the case, actually this was decided on August 21st. So the defendant has been charged with murder in the Philippines. And he was released after Philippine court rendered a not guilty verdict. But he was prosecuted again in Korean trial court, which sentenced him to imprisonment of 10 years. The defendant then appealed on the ground that the Article 7 of the Criminal Act of Korea should be applied for the period exceeding 5 years when he was detained pending trial in Philippines. So during the pending trial, he was detained before the verdict come for 5 years, but it is not actually calculated when the sentence was given by the Korean court. And Supreme Court rejected the defendant's claim and also confirmed that the lower court did not make any error in applying the Criminal Act. So this is the second case that I will introduce. The Criminal Act, Article 7 of Republic of Korea, stipulates that, quote, if an offender has undergone the full or partial execution of sentence in post-upload because of a crime, the sentence either wholly or partially executed shall be included in the sentences to be declared in Korea. So one of the main issues in this case is how to interpret the offender who has undergone the full or partial execution of sentence in post-upload that stipulate under Article 7 of the Criminal Act. The court reviewed whether a person accused in criminal case and detained pending trial for a considerable period before being acquitted in a foreign country falls under this provision or not. And court ruled that criminal sentence is exercised by the penal authority as part of the state sovereignty. Therefore, even if punishment imposed on an offender by foreign court is final and conclusive, Korean courts are not bound by such court judgment. And the doctrine of double jeopardy cannot be applied since it does not have any res judicata in Korean occupied law. The court confirmed that even if having been detained pending trial for a considerable period prior to acquittal in that country, a person accused in a criminal case but then acquitted abroad can. So he cannot be deemed sentenced executed abroad as prescribed by Article 7 of the Penal Code. But in this case, I was interested in reading dissenting opinions by 5 justices from the perspective of human rights. They admitted that Article 7 of the Criminal Act of Korea could not conclude as inapplicable to a person who was merely held in pre-trial detention before acquittal abroad. However, 5 dissenting judges maintained that the number of days detained pending trial should be either wholly or partially counted toward the sentence to be declared in Korea based on analogical interpretation. This is because if a criminal defendant were to have been prosecuted for the same offense in Korea and subsequently punished under Korean criminal law without taking into consideration the fact that the defendant has been previously detained abroad, then this could be deemed an excessive infringement of the defendant's right to personal liberty. This corresponds with the constitutional spirit declaring the principles of due process to protect the personal liberty too. So this is a second case that I would like to share with you. And the third one is actually this is the biggest incident that happened in 2017, the impeachment of the president. Actually, this case did not directly deal with the implementation of international law. But in the decision, the Constitutional Court confirmed the legal status of international treaties and customary international law under the domestic legal system in Korea. So Article 65 of the Korean Constitution provides that a ground for impeachment is either violation of the Constitution or other laws, in the performance of official duties. And the Constitutional Court ruled that the Constitution includes an unwritten Constitution formed and established by the President of the Constitutional Court, as well as the express constitutional provisions. And other laws include not only statute in their formal context, but also inter alia, international treaties that have the same force as statute and international law that has been generally accepted. End quote. So it is in the same line which was stipulated in Article 6, paragraph 1 of the Constitution. So clearly confirm the same legal status as domestic law of the international treaties ratified by Korean government. So these are the treaties, and also because of the limited time, we'll skip the last case that I actually prepared to introduce. And I would like to share some legislation that was adopted or amended zone and continental shelf, which was amended in March 21st, 2017. This act was amended with the purpose to protect rights and interests of the Republic of Korea in the sea and contribute to establishing an international maritime border by prescribing the sovereign right exercised by the Korea and jurisdiction thereof regarding its exclusive economic zone and continental shelf in accordance with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So Article 2, 3, 4, 5 are all amended to meet the spirit and the provisions that's stipulated in the UNCLOS. I will skip the details of the contents. Next, the Act on Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste and Their Disposal, which was also amended in April 18th. The purpose of this act is to prevent any environmental pollution caused by the transboundary movement of waste and to promote international cooperation and to contribute to environmental conservation and qualitative improvement in the lives of people by implementing the Basel Convention on the control of transboundary movement and hazardous waste and their disposal. Based on Article 18, for example, any person who intends to export or import waste subject to export or import control shall make a declaration for export or import to the Minister of Environment, along with the type, quantity, and plan of disposal of such waste. Next, I'd like to share the Act on Origins Labeling of Agriculture and Fishery Products, which was amended in October 13th, 2017. The purpose of this act is to protect producers and consumers by guaranteeing the right of consumers to be informed and inducing fair trade by having producers indicate the country of origin of agriculture and fishery products or processed products thereof, etc., in an appropriate and reasonable manner. And based on amended Article 7, for example, the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, the Minister of Oceans and Fisheries, and Commissioners of the Korean Customs Service, or the Mayor or Governor shall require the relevant public officers to collect or investigate agriculture and fishery products or the processed products thereof subject to labeling the country of origin as prescribed by presidential decree in order to ascertain whether country of origin labels are placed in labeled matters, the method of labeling, etc., are appropriate pursuant to Article 5. Lastly, I'd like to share the information that Korea finally withdrew a reservation of Article 21, paragraph A of the Convention on the Right of the Child. Actually, the withdrawal of the reservation was done on August 11th, 2017. So Korea actually ratified the CRC, Convention on the Rights of the Child, in 1991. And for the last 26 years, we keep the reservation on Article 21, paragraph A of the CRC. Actually, the most Islamic countries has reserved the Article 21, and Korea actually the only state in non-Islamic state which make a reservation on Article 21, paragraph A. And Article 21 stipulates that, quote, state parties that recognize and or permit the system of adoption shall ensure the best interest of the child shall be the paramount consideration, and they shall A, ensure that the adoption of child is authorized only by competent authorities who determine in accordance with applicable law and procedures and on the basis of all pertinent and reliable information, that the adoption is permissible in view of the child's status concerning parents, relatives, and legal guardians, and that the persons concerned have given their informed consent to the adoption on the basis of such counseling as may be necessary. End quote. So to implement Article 21, paragraph A of the Convention, for the last decades, the Korean government revised the Act of Special Cases Concerning Adoption in 2011. And also, a new provision on permission from the family court concerning the adoption of minors were established in the Civil Act of Korea in 2012. And 2013, the Korean government introduced in Family Litigation Act a procedure for permission for adoption, requiring the family court to hear the opinion from prospective foster child. where that child is at least 13 years old of age. And finally, Korea withdrew the reservation of Article 21 of CRC in August 2017. These are some of the state practice in 2017 by the Republic of Korea. Thank you. Thank you very much for Professor Bai. So this is interesting. So he presents about the current development in Korea in compliance with the practice in international law. So for the next speaker will be Professor Subuli. So he will speak about the progress and challenges for maritime boundary delimitation between China and Korea. And the time is yours.
Again, good morning, everyone. While I hear my colleagues' presentation in terms of the state practice in Korea last year, the biggest issues, as you know, the headline of the word is the impeachment of the Korea. We make a joke, in Koreans make a joke, is that the most dangerous job in Korea is actually the president. As you know, as you may know, the first president went to exile, and the second one is assassinated, and the third one and the fourth one went to jail. And the fifth and sixth one, they are fine, but their sons went to jail. And the seventh one made suicide, and 8 and 9 soon are now in jail. You know, we have a new president last year, as you know, he doing great job so far, but we have to see what exactly happened after 5 years. So today, I'm going to talk about the maritime boundary delimitation between China and Korea. As you see that main sponsors of this program from the Korean side, the DILA Korea, we got the sponsor from the many institutes which largely focus on working on the ocean and maritime issue. So that this presentation, I believe that I should present it together with my colleagues from the KIOS, from the main sponsor of this program. But he is not able to come. So on behalf of him, or our sponsor, we're working on the ocean and policy. I'm going to present one of the very salient issues in Korea, which is maritime delimitation with Korea and China. Yes, I'm briefly talking about one of the hard issues Korea has in terms of the maritime jurisdiction or maritime disputes between Korea and Japan and Korea and China. As you see that Korea is a very small state, neighboring with the big powers of the world, like in Japan, China, and Russia, even North Korea. It's a very, the small state. It's not like the Indonesia who control the many area of the ocean. And the problem Korea has in terms of the ocean and policy is that except a very limited area for the maritime, maritime the boundary was not decided yet. So we are right now engaged the maritime between Korea and China. And I'm going to talk about specifically this area, the area which is overlapping between Korea and China and Japan. Because although we're talking about this, the bilateral issues between Korea and China, but some area has the multilateral implication. So that has the serious issues for to states to move forward when they talking about this maritime delimitation. As I mentioned, like the Indonesia and many other countries of the world, we have sovereignty issues, delimitation, and the fishing activist law enforcement, and also the marine boundary issues in these days. And today, why the most important issues why there is a delay in terms of the negotiation on the issues of maritime delimitation between China and Korea, because the issues of the law enforcement is made. when you're talking about the law enforcement, Indonesia is very popular in Korea. In particular, the Coast Guard in Indonesia, they react against the Chinese illegal fishing activities in the ocean field, ocean area. So that we want to get some lessons, whether Indonesia is fine after you have a very strong law enforcement activities against the foreign states in your own jurisdiction. And I want to just briefly touch upon some of the issues Korea has. For example, this is the so-called Northern Limit Line. There is a huge debate between North Korea and South Korea on this area, and sometimes there's the military skirmishes between the states. And this is what happens in 2011. We call the Cheonan corvettes, the sinking by the during the still. Exact cause of that the sinking is debated, but it presumes that some of the issues come from the north. And the other issue is that this is under this feature. In Korean term is yodo, and the Chinese term is suichao. And the Western term is suputora. This is not the features can generate the maritime zone. This is under this feature. 4.6 meters under the sea, but Korea government to build an ocean observation center, which is actually built by the KIOS, one of our sponsor. They built this one, and it has one of the intentions because there is no fixed maritime boundary to states. But what is the meaning of this artificial installation in terms of what implication they have when they negotiate between two states? One of the issues on the table. And the biggest issue is actually this one. This is a Chinese fisherman. Looks like a Korean, but they are Chinese. And they are the Korean Coast Guard. And this is not the military vessels. This is the fishing boat. And you are maybe familiar with what happened here in Indonesia, the ocean jurisdiction, when the Chinese fishermen engage in fishing activities. So I'm very happy to talk freely since we don't have any delegate from China from the DILA side. This is a very rare opportunity for me to talk. And this is white dots. This is a Chinese fishing boat. And the fishing boat should have the GPS. And since we don't have any fixed boundary, but if you see that the white dots, the many white dots, you can see that inside of the Korean, the EEZ, which is controlled by the Coast. This is an Incheon where I'm working on. Sometimes I saw that a couple of the fishing boat outside my office. I didn't sometimes curious whether that fishing boat from China was in Korea. And the other issue is that they even go inside of the inland of the Korea. But there is a very serious legal issues coming up because you see that this area is controlled by the UNC. It is not controlled by the South Korea and then North Korea. So that if the fishing boats go inside that area, there's another issues come up who can exercise the law enforcement activities against the fishing agency's boats. You can see that the United Nations the flag. So that Korean Coast Guard and Navy working with the United Nations, the command station in Korea to engage fishing against illegal fishing activities of China. That is actually what happened in the West Sea or Yellow Sea between the countries of Korea and China. And yes, I'm talking about the East Sea and Sea of Japan. Since we have a delegate from Japan here, I skipped these parts so that we can enjoy the lunch. And the China-Japan fisheries are withdrawn. So that if you look at this area, the smallpox, this is a quite interesting area because that area is 3 states the law enforcement activities actually might have overlap. But quite curiously, there is no skirmishes or there is no serious the issues come up because something happened. That is the why I am very curious about this issue. So if you look at when you're working on the just issues, we have to first approach that what is the international law, and then we have to see that what is a bilateral agreement, then move to that domestic legislation. This box is interestingly not clarified by the agreement itself. It can box the of the agreement. Yesterday we talked about how we interpret the treaty, and this is quite curious that where the coordinator came from. That is why I'm going to talk today. And the fisheries agreement of the East China Sea, as I mentioned, that there is no maritime boundary among the three states in this region, but we do have a fisheries agreement between Korea-Japan, Korea-China, and China-Japan. So that area is governed by the fisheries agreement, not maritime boundary or easy line. And the first, if I look at the fisheries agreement between the China, which was done the 2001, they say the Article 9 say that both contract parties in a certain area and other certain area shall not apply their law and regulation on fisheries against nationals and fishing vessels of the other party, and shall maintain current fishing order unless agreed otherwise between two parties. The term of these certain areas is really uncertain, so that it causes serious tensions in this China Sea. But if you look at the Korea-Japan fisheries agreement, also very interesting articles we can find. For example, Article 9 say, the provisions shall apply to the area north of the southernmost parallel of the EEZ of Korea. And then the next say that each contract party shall not apply its relevant law and regulation fisheries to national and fishing vessels of the contract parties in the zone. So yesterday I mentioned that there is a disparity in terms of the interpretation between Korea and Japan in terms of what is the southernmost parallel of the EEZ of Korea. So if you look at the map again, which I showed you yesterday, that is next to the same agreements, the Korea-Japan's fishing agreements. But if you see at the map, same agreement, same text, but there's two different versions of the map they use. If you look at the map here, the southernmost part of the EEZ of the Korean map is different with the Japanese version. I'm not saying that which one is correct or not, but I want to say that there is a disparity or differences in terms of the interpretation of the text. And the China-Japan fisheries agreements also has quite similar provisions. For example, each contracting party shall apply impose measures and other necessary measures to national vessels fishing in their PMZ, provisional measure zone. Each contract party may now apply imposable measures or the necessary measures to the national fishing vessels of other contract party fishing in the provisional measure zone. So three states has quite similar articles in their three bilateral fisheries agreements. So this PMZ, the provisional measure zone of this China and Japan fisheries agreement, is overlap, right, with the lowest boundary line of the current fishing pattern zone of the Korea-China fisheries agreement, and also overlap with the lowest boundary line of the intermediate zone in the southern Jeju, which now is demarcated by Korea of the Korea-Japan fisheries agreement. So technically, this box, there are three. The jurisdiction of three states is over, so that we have to be very careful. I mean, in particular, the law enforcement agencies should be very careful when they approach or when they enforce their activities against the fishing vessels and nationals of the states. And then we have to be looking at the domestic law on the each state jurisdiction. In Korea, we have our own domestic legislation. For example, 1996, the article say that where agreement with 40 states exists, the agreement shall apply. And the Korea shall not exercise right in EEZ in an area beyond the median line between Korea and the relevant state, unless agreed separately between the relevant state and Korea. Which means that if Korea applied international first, but if there was no international law, the law enforcement activities should start beyond just beyond the median line. In this law enforcement to go beyond the median line is refrained. Thank you. And if you look at the Chinese version, domestic legislation, they say that ease of China covers the area beyond the territories of China, extending 200 nautical miles from the baselines from the abreast of territorial seas method. So there is no mention or there is no regulation in terms of the restricting exercise of jurisdiction and in respect to the overlapping waters in relation to the neighboring state. Last, when you touch upon the Japan's version, Japan is very carefully drafted on the domestic legislation. They say that the EEZ is comprised area of the sea extending from the baseline of Japan to the line every point of the 200 nautical miles from the nearest point of baseline of Japan. By that, where any part of the line beyond the median line as measured from the baseline of Japan, the median line shall be substituted for the part of the line, which means that Japan exercise with a limit to the boundary, which is the opposite median line. So if we interpret the three domestic legislation of the Korea, Japan, and China in terms of the law enforcements, we can say that from the accessory state domestic law on exercising sovereign rights in their own EEZ, all the three states declare 200 nautical miles EEZ. But as you see that the area is less than 400 nautical miles, so definitely we have an overlapping area. And but in the case of overlapping claims to EEZ, the basic principle of Korea is where there are separate agreements with the foreign state, the agreements apply. The international go first. And but where no such agreement exists, law enforcement is refrained beyond the median line with the other state. So Korean the law enforcement just stop where the median line existed if there is no bilateral agreement. And but in other hand, China exercised without limits, and but Japan exercised with the limit to the boundary, which is up to the median line. So Horseshoe State has a different version of the domestic legislation. So combining with the three bilateral agreements in terms of the fisheries and also domestic legislation, because when you are working on the ocean policy, we first working on the UNCLOS United Nations Convention of the Sea, but also just provide a guideline, not specify what each state parties have to do. So that produced a very interesting area which I showed you before. So as I mentioned, I notified that I noticed the 10 coordinates through the interpretation and application of domestic legislation as the bilateral agreements. And then this is what we see today. But as I mentioned that there's no report, serious report in terms of the casualties or in terms of dispute among the three states. So there are something we can find some of the lessons, how the three states incorporate each other, even if there is no boundary delimitation among the state parties concerned. And if you see that this is one of the boxes, but if you look at it very carefully, you can find 20 different jurisdictions you can notice. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'll be back to 11. No. Yeah, yes. Did I say that 11? Yeah. Okay. So whole different areas you can notice. So this is a truly different jurisdiction. You can notice very small box located in this China Sea. So that you have to be very careful. Actually, the foreign ministry in Japan and China and Korea got the many inquiry from the law enforcement officers who are working at the scene, whether they engage or when they whether they have a lawful rights to arrest fishing vessels in their jurisdiction. And so this is the what. If you look at the, as I said, that there are 20 kinds of jurisdiction, and this is the area, all the 3 states, the fishing boat can engage the fisheries activities because they have rights either based on the bilateral agreements or the domestic legislation. So this is the most dangerous area for the fishes, fishes, because every fisherman can engage in fishing activities here. And the other one is, Japanese cannot go. This is where the Korean fishing boats cannot go. And this is the area where the Chinese fishing boats cannot go. And this is only Chinese, the Japanese fishing boats can engage in fishing activities. And this is only Chinese, and this is only Koreans. So that if the fish is very smart, they can survive. Because if they notice that which the flag of the fishing boats can fly, you may go to the stream and live there without any issues. So my conclusion, my presentation is that did you see that this is actually seen the daily basis in Korea? This is even small dots indicate, as I mentioned, the Chinese fishing boat inside of the Korean EEZ or Korean jurisdiction. But if you look at this one, this is not a normal law enforcement activities at the daily basis. Sometimes because the casualties of the Korean Coast Guard, the officers, when they engage the arrest of the Chinese fishing boats, and actually told the Korean Coast Guard, the officers was killed during their operation. So that is one of the biggest issues for Korea. So that Korea and China want to limit their maritime boundary as early as possible, so that current regime of the fisheries agreement merge into the maritime delimitation. So the conclusion I want to address is that the fishing as fisheries regime is not vulnerable with the possibility of this legal conflict. As I mentioned, the 3 states involved in this small box. But as I mentioned, that there's no serious reports so far, which means that maybe the 3 states refrain their law enforcement, the activities against the national fishing boat, because they try to avoid any tensions in these days. So we have to get some lessons how the law enforcement activities can be done. In particular, where the in particular the overlapping area in terms of the jurisdiction. So thank you. This is what exactly happening these days in Korea in terms of the maritime delimitation negotiation between Korea and China. So I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it is very brief that we understand about the delimitation between Korea and the 3 important states, Russia, China, and also Japan. So there should be a consent between them to solve the issues on fisheries. So we will go further to the 3rd speaker, the lady. Yeah, the only lady in this table. So, Professor Sunyoung Lee, we will speak about refugee and humanitarian crisis, paving the way for refugee protection in East Asia. So the time is yours.
Good morning, all. It's truly not only an honor to be the part of this conference, but also to be part of this historical city of Jakarta, which I'm very anxious to explore after this conference is over. Today, I'm going to cover any two topics under the same heading. The title of my presentation will be Refugee Protection Based on Humanity. And I'm going to add the implementation aspect of Korea as respect to this Refugee Act, which Professor Beck mentioned that this is one of the first domestic registration in Asia. So I'm going to start with the definition of the refugee under the international law. And then my suggestion is that we have situations in terms of humanitarian crisis that they cannot be built within the framework of the international convention on the refugee. So let me start it off, but I will come back to that table a little later on. So as you may all know, that 1951 convention relating to the status of refugee, commonly known as Refugee Convention, is the key instrument in terms of refugee protection. However, it does not fit easily with some of the definitions that we face today in terms of the humanitarian related problems, including those situations from Syria and also people from Rohingya that we often that they get exposed in the media. So when we encounter such situations, we know that there are clearly the limits that is inherent in terms of defining who is a refugee under the international aspect. So as Professor Beck already mentioned that there are 5 particular grounds that asylum seekers must be based on when they apply for the asylum, for the refugee. So first, I'm going to mention the Article 1A2 as to define the refugee, but my focus is not on the definition. My focus will be on the other article which has been overlooked in Article 1A1. But to start with Article 1A2, the Article 1A2 is this definition, where they are giving the definition, and it protects a particular targeted individuals, but not necessarily those people fleeing from generalized violence or armed conflict. Because the convention, actually historically, the references to this protection in Article 1 was seen primarily as references to diplomats and consular protection, rather than emphasizing the effectiveness of the state. So since an individual must satisfy under this article to trigger refugee status, Article 1A1 is often, as I just mentioned, overlooked. So what I want to emphasize is that why don't we expand the definition of refugee by looking at other provisions in the Refugee Convention? For instance, Article 1A1. I'm going to read out some of the provisions from this Article 1A1. Article 1A1 extends the benefits to anyone who has been considered a refugee under the arrangement of May 12, 1926, etc., etc., and also over the Constitution of the International Refugee Organization. So it must be noted that the fact that the Refugee Convention recognized all previous refugee definitions as giving rights to convention status is very significant, since this typically protected victims of armed conflict or generalized violence. So the Article 1A1 is actually included that we have to make sure that there is continuity of international protection of refugees. And this para was established by the League of Nations with this adoption of a number of international agreements that I just mentioned within this article. So the definition in this article 1A1 relate each category of refugees to their national origin, to the territory that they left and to the lack of a diplomatic protection by their home country. So comparing to this Article 1A1 with Article 1A2, you can see that this type of definition by 1A1 is much simple and posed no great difficulty in deciding who is actually a refugee. Also, in terms of interpretation, maybe we can possibly extend the scope of definition by looking at other articles within the refugee order, not only the Article 1A1, but throughout the refugee conventions, we have a number of articles that apply to all refugees. For instance, in Article 7, exemption from reciprocity, Article 13, movable and immovable property, Article 22, public education, and etc. So it is very evident that the drafters of the Refugee Convention were very keen to the need to protect the rights of all refugees in various situations, as you can see in these articles, because these articles was meant to treat the refugees on the same footing as aliens, as non-nationals. Also, as a technique of interpretation, we also have to look at the preamble to look at the purposes and objects of the convention itself. So when you look at the preamble of the Refugee Convention, it clearly links the Charter of the United Nations with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Also, in the preamble also it says, all states recognizing the social and humanitarian nature of the problem of refugees will do everything within their power to prevent this problem from becoming to expanding the scope. Since the Refugee Convention is itself a very specialized human rights instrument, so the scope of protection should be necessarily extended by the development of a general international human rights law. So now I'm going to move on to then how has international community been responding to this so-called humanitarian crisis, since they are not actually fully under the Refugee Convention, meaning under the Article 1A2 exactly. So even though we do not call them a conventional refugees, because we have to qualify these 5 particular categories like race, religion, political opinion, etc. So in terms of there are 2 attempts that I would like to introduce. The first is the EU Directive on Qualification. But this is a form of subsidiary protection that in 2004, the EU adopted what is known as a Qualification Directive. It says, they established much like harmonized approach towards people falling outside the scope of the Refugee Convention, so that we cannot give them, in terms of the legal protection under this term of the Refugee Convention. However, they found some ways to provide some benefits through some subsidiary protections. Also, in more recent terms, in 2016, with the increasing number of refugees, particularly in the mid of 2015, I guess, there was the first UN summit meeting to especially address this issue. And the outcome of this meeting was 2016 New York Declaration on Refugee and Migrant Movements. Within this framework, 4 key points were emphasized. The first point was that we, as an international community, has to ease pressure on host countries. And second, enhance refugee self-reliance. And third, expand third country solutions. And fourth, to support conditions in countries of origin for return in safety and dignity. So far, I just mentioned how how the refugee is defined under the international law, but there is still a legal vacuum to fill the gap for those people who are fleeing from generalized violence or from the civil war or war-related problems. So in response to this international call, I would like at this moment to turn your attention to the practice of Korea in terms of refugee protection. It is not that surprising that only 5 countries have signed or acceded to the 1951 Refugee Convention in Asia. To name them is Cambodia, China, Japan, Philippines, and the Republic of China. Now we must wonder why this happened, why there was so why has Asia been so passive about this movement. The lack of support for the refugee convention from Asian states can be well explained by the Eurocentric focus of the convention at the time of the creation. If you look at the background of the history of the convention, at that time, most Asian states were absent from the proceedings while the refugee convention was contracted in a series of conferences in 1949 and 1950. So. And also, at the same time, many Asian states felt that the refugee convention did not provide a solution or strategy for dealing with these situations, and they had to worry that it put too much burden on their situations at that time. But however, the displacement in Asia was most often the result of the social and political change triggered by decolonization. So unlike Africa, which saw the refugee convention as an instrument in the struggle against colonialism, Asia was not, or Asia did not relate the refugee regime with the cause of decolonization. So this could possibly explain why there was not much support from the beginning. Also, one of the famous scholars on this issue, Professor Chini, was observed that in Asia, according to his opinion, law is not perceived is not perceived as a principal solution to social problems. Asian cultures tend to rely equally on social values to respond to social issues. So in this case, the problem of refugee protection. So now, with this in mind, so there are only 5 countries, and we are the first country that actually registered the law on the refugee. So let me quickly explain the background and overview of the Korean Refugee Act and how we have been implementing and what are some challenges that are ahead. In terms of the legislative background, we started with in 1990. We started with the Immigration Control Act, which was amended in 1993 to include a few provisions on refugee protections. And the 11th Refugee Act was done in 2012, and which subsequently came into force since 2013. So it's been a little bit over 5 years now. So what are some issues? Why did we have to enact our own refugees? So there are two main reasons behind it. But before, could you? As I just pointed out, the two main reasons that possibly why we have been so much involved with this refugee law. In particular response to the UNHCR's call for responsibility sharing, Korea, as you can see, the contribution to UNHCR in 2013, the Korea's increased engagement in humanitarian affairs over recent years have increased in a very large scale. In the past decade, the support of Korea to the work of UNHCR has been considered, but UNHCR has quadrupled from 2012 to 2016, making the Philippines biggest donor to the organization. But what I wanted to emphasize in this chart is not the part of Korea. As you can see, sorry, you cannot see that, it's too small, but in the 16, well, the Korean government is ranked actually in 25th, but the private donors from Korea are ranked second to the private donors in the US. So it's not only the government, it's the private sectors that is heavily involved with the giving the financial assistance to UNHCR. And because of the situations in 2017, the Korea contribution reached more than 21 million US dollars, and we became a member of so-called the $20 million club of major donors to UNHCR. And second, as I just mentioned, we have a solid legal basis in the Refugee Act. On the table 2, if you can see the numbers here, we had only less than 10,000 applicants between 1994 and 2005. As you can see, from the launch of this new law on the Refugee Act, the number has been decreased considerably. Well, unfortunately, the rate for the refugee status has not been that great. But if you improve those people who are accepted to stay on a humanitarian basis, that the numbers are increasing in terms of what they considerably increased compared to the previous years. So these are the two trends that support how the Refugee Act became a more like vital issues in Korea. In terms of the Refugee Act, I want to highlight 3 main features. The one was, well, we have 3 very striking features that I would like to introduce. The first one is that, well, as far as the asylum seekers, we call the refugee applicant, once they apply for the refugee in Korea, they are entitled to social and medical assistance on a temporary basis. So that was the one included in the Refugee Act. And also, the second, the article that I want to emphasize is that even the humanitarian holders, as you can see, that there are certain people, more than 1,000 people, that have been protected under humanitarian status. So they are also given some form of social protection, such as work permit. And also, in Article 24, we have a resettlement policy that is enacted into the law of into the Korean Refugee Act. So I want to, in my last part of the presentation, out of those 3, I want to put my emphasis on the resettlement issues that has the legal basis in the Refugee Act. So what do we mean by a resettlement? Well, resettlement is not a legal obligation. However, the UNHCR is making an initiative on this resettlement program so that even though they are not they are not qualified as so-called conventional refugees or the refugee convention, UNHCR has its own mandate, so they can review it and they can recommend to other countries. So the resettlement program is conducted on a voluntary basis. Japan is one of the first countries that started resettlement program. And there are only a little bit over 30 countries that is participating in this resettlement. And Korea started our 3-year pilot program starting from 2015, and it just ended last year. So finally, we had some time to review what had happened. So to briefly talk about what had happened, starting in 2015, we only accepted people from Myanmar, Karen, and Rohingya. for a total number of 86. So in 2015, it was 22. In 2016, increased to 34. So approximately 30% per year was admitted as under the resettlement refugee program. So what is the selection process? Well, the Korean Ministry of Justice, we actually submit the first candidate, the possible candidate, and the UNHCR submits a list, and then there is a review period, like document and interviews conducted by the Ministry of Justice in Korea. So after the medical examination by the International Organizations for Migration, IOM, the final decision will be made by also definitely the Ministry of Justice in Korea. So there are three organizations, or there are three institutions involved: UNHCR and IOM, and also the Korean government. But the problem, well, I would not say a problem, but the UNHCR is saying that what was the criteria in selecting those candidates for the resettlement program? Well, our priority in selection was on the potential to be integrated into Korean society. But if you take a look at from the human rights aspect, if you have to choose who to be included in our country, this should be based on more like human rights-based approach. However, for the past 3 years, Korean government considered putting more emphasis on the ability to be able to adjust the Korean society, language, and education, and culture. However, UNHCR recommends further that for if there should be any more additional programs, that we have to consider legal or physical protection needs, and the medical needs, and women and girls at risk, or children or adolescents at risk. So those are some categories that the UNHCR actually made recommendations that we should put more emphasis. So coming down to almost the end of my presentation, I would like to point out some of the challenges that we have. Yes, we do have low numbers, which have been under the criticisms for over the past years. However, the number does not say everything. Like we have to take a look at all those policies and the progress of implementation, and also the potential programs that we have in mind all together. So in my conclusions, so as I just mentioned, there are some remaining issues that actually Korea has joined in this journey of sharing so-called responsibility to share with the community in terms of the refugee protections. And actually, even though we only have an experience of 5 years so far, maybe you can shed some light on the developing this regime within the Asia, so that we know we had our trials and errors, so that maybe we can talk about it and make it more efficient way to have some type of instrument possibly in Asia in the later on. That will conclude my conclusion.
Please. That the private donors in Korea has more contribution than the government. So we would like to open the discussion. So maybe if you have any questions, maybe you can raise your hand and then just explain the questions in short, so we can finish this on the schedule. So please, is there any questions? Okay, Patrick first. Okay.
First of all, I'll go backwards, I guess. Professor Saryon, asking about the Immigration Act. I guess my first question is, who administers that? I guess Professor Beck raised the Supreme Court issue at the beginning, and that's the ultimate court of jurisdiction. But does the Immigration Department manage or make the determinations of asylum, or is there another specific who has original jurisdiction over determining that? I guess my question. And then the other Professor E. You had mentioned that there are existing contracts, or I guess the fisheries contract among China, Japan, and South Korea. Are there specific provisions for law enforcement? For example, if successfully, and the crew of the vessel, is there a procedure for prosecuting them in Korea or returning them? Is that addressed specifically by that agreement or by other international agreements? And then finally, Professor Beck, asking about the first case, sexual orientation as a grounds for refugee status. If you could expand binding on other cases determining refugee status. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Christopher Casson. So, should we gather all the questions? Or okay, so Professor Sriwardini? Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to have a question to Professor Bell. I'm interested that you presenting about how that the Korean practice about international law, and I would like to have more elaboration regarding the implementation of Basel Convention in Korea. And my first question is, Korea is the importing state or exporting state in the extra hazardous waste. So is it importing or exporting? If, for example, that's Korea is the importing state, so what kind of mechanism that has been provided by the Korean government? Because when I read about the Basel Convention regarding the requirement to be legal about the importing of the waste, that the importing state has to provide for the waste processing facility, which is this kind of facility. It should be able to process the waste so that the waste will not cause harmful impact on the importing state. So I would like to know how the Korean practice on this kind of mechanism. But on the hand, if Korea is the exporting state, so I would like also to know how about the mechanism. And the second question, it would be to be addressed to Professor Zeko. I'm interested from your presentation regarding the just state like the economic deposit zone of Japan and Korea and also China. That Japan and especially China, that China doesn't apply about the delimitation itself. There is no limit, even though that for example, the distance between the two states here is no more than 400 nautical miles, means that it will be used the median line. But China doesn't have any limitation in this case. And on the other hand, Korea has already made such kind of determination to secession that the limit here is in the median line. So how about when the Chinese has already trespass or that they make a fishing upon this kind of limit? Is there any kind of law enforcement on the national law of Korea will be applicable to Japanese fishing? And in practice, what kind of sanction it will be given to the Chinese fishermen? And maybe the third and will be addressed to Professor Serwan. That and quite interesting also that Korea has already participated in contributing on the financial support of the refugee, and also even that the Korean government also issued the work permit for the refugee. So as in this kind of policy, is it will not make the conflict with the citizen of Korea? Because if we will also offering about the work permit, of course, we have also to provide job for them. So is there any kind of challenge facing in the Korean country? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sriwardini. Is there any question? Okay, so I think we have 6 questions from two participants, Professor Christopher and Sriwardini. So each speaker has 2 questions. So I would like to ask Professor Bai as the first speaker to answer the questions. Thank you for the question. The first case, the defendant is from Egypt, and he argued that Egyptian government, if he come back to Egypt, he may have chance at the persecution. Then the lower court so agreed on his argument, claimed, and then recognized him as a refugee. But the Supreme Court ruled that actually through the reviewing the fact, actually what his activities in Egypt, the Supreme Court decided that his activities in Egypt doesn't consider as activity for the LGBT movement or the rights, and he actually not explicitly maintained that he is his homosexuality and so on. So not, but from the legal rationale, but from the fact, he cannot be considered as the refugee for protection. Regarding the question on the waste disposal issue, so Korea ratified Basel Convention, but there has been many criticisms through the media for years that even the government has no information on the import of the waste disposal. Actually, Korea is kind of intermediate state. So from the US or Canada and other countries, those waste come from the Western country, and then it is transferred to other ASEAN countries actually, and then some South Asian countries. So in that sense, Korea amended the domestic legislation that to impose those private entities when they import or transfer those waste, declare and register before the government, and then government can make a list and it can be reported to the treaty body, the Basel Convention in Geneva. That's what I can say. Maybe it can be not enough answer. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bai. So we can conclude that there is specific mechanism in the work of the hazardous waste in Korea. And then for the next speaker, I would like to ask Professor Sebuli to answer the question. 2 questions. 1 question from Christopher, and then 1 question from Professor Sriwardini.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. In fact, we do have a domestic legislation in terms of the confiscation of the vessels and the fishermen engaged in fishing activities within the Korean side of the EEZ. As I mentioned, since there's no fixed boundary between the countries in terms of the EEZ, so both countries, China and Korea, we do have the partner in the measure zone. And as I showed the photos, the large dots in line, the Chinese fishermen not even go inside the provincial measure zone, but go inside of the Korean side of EEZ. So statistics say that the last year we confiscated about 400 the Chinese fishing vessels, and the bonds or the fines for the confiscated vessels is 300,000 US dollars. It's not a small money. In rupiah terms, quite a lot. Yeah, so that actually was increased after the actual casualties happened to the Korean businessman Coast Guard. So we do have some fines, and we have the criminal charges against the Chinese fishermen. But the problem is that the number of the illegal activities is not decreased much. So that the one of the simulation in terms of the legal sectors of the Coast Guard is that actually we have lined up the 28 the standing warrants against the Chinese fishermen. But the problem is if you see that the actual practice of the fisheries activities, not always the fishermen, same fishermen, they use the same fishing vessels. So they, not only transshipments in terms of the fisheries resources, but fishermen move around with the different vessels. So that law enforcement activities from the Korean side against the Chinese fishermen and the Chinese fishing vessels do not provide any, meaningful outcome so far. That's why the Korean side really wants to put the limits which are bounded with China as early as possible. We have right now the 11th round of the negotiations between the two sides, but we even do not decide yet in which area we the limit first. Because as I mentioned, there's such an area, right? The nurse will have some implication with North Korea, but to the southern part of Korea, we have some implication overlapping with Japan. So that there are a long way to go, and that is what we have in this period. So that if I summarize again the applications I have, we have some the system, the criminal charges against Chinese fishermen and its investors, and we have some pool, but on top of the criminal enforcement against those the fishermen and the vessels, the still may get such a number today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Sopwoli. So the next, Professor.
And he asked me about the determination procedures before determining the refugee area. Well, I will have to explain a little bit more detail because I'm not going to say Supreme Court because it's a little bit complicated. When asylum seekers arrive in Korea at the port or at the airport, so they have to actually have to make an application there. And then there is an initial interview being conducted by the Ministry of Justice at that time. So they first decide who is eligible to be admitted, and once they are denied, and then there is appealing process, which is there's a national committee on refugee, which I am also a member of the refugee, and we decide on this appealing case. And then, so this is the second review. And at the time, if this applicant is still denied, and then this person can make a case in the court. But this is only one track. And the other track is that if you do not want to go through these national committees, you can directly go to after the denied at the court, they can make their case in the administrative court, and they go all the way to the Supreme Court. And what is interesting about this procedure is that once the Supreme Court makes the final decisions, they can reapply without the limits. So actually, it could take some years to get the final decisions, as you mentioned. So I hope that answered the first question. And the second question came from Professor Sriwatini. Well, she is wondering whether there's any conflict in terms of social challenges in Korea because of this. We are being very positive about including those people as refugees or humanitarian workers. Yes, we do have situations, and I would not say that we don't have such a favorable atmosphere and environment in Korea as well. However, we have a number of social integration programs available by different NGOs and civil societies. So through the education, and we emphasize diversity in Korea because, as you all may know, Korea is very heterogeneous, but not heterogeneous. So that the education is the first part that we have to actually work. We have to adopt to overcome these kind of challenges. And what is underlying this issue is that this is not just about who will be included in our society or not. This is rather about, in the more broad sense, this is between the how to efficiently incorporate the drive for the protection on one hand, and also at the same time, how to balance whatever we have to do with the deterrence of the security regions or the social regions. So these are the ongoing dilemmas that every country is faced. So I just want to make a suggestion that there should be some type of global initiative, because I know that this is not this is internal dilemma that not only one country can solve by their own. So this is the part that we actually need a global initiative. I hope this answered the question.
Thank you very much. Please give applause to the three speakers. So this is my last duty as a moderator, so I have to conclude the three speakers' presentation. Professor Bai, as the first speaker, he mentioned about several current practice of international law by the Korean government, especially about the position of the same-sex marriage, and then the Article 7 of the Criminal Act that should be construed narrowly in the protection of human rights, and the position of bilateral treaty that has a similar position with the domestic law. And he also mentioned about the two amendments of the two domestic laws in Korea, the Economic Exclusive Zone Act and also the Act of Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste. And then Professor Sokwu, as the second speaker, he mentioned about the current position of the agreement, especially for the limitation boundaries on fisheries agreement with the three important states, Russia, China, and Japan. And he mentioned that there should be a further consent to solve the issues on fisheries in Korea. And then the last speaker, Professor Seren, interestingly, she mentioned about that there are only 5 countries in Asia participating in the 1951 of the Refugee Convention: Cambodia, China, Japan, Philippines, and Korea. No one is coming. No Indonesia from here. So this is our handbook, maybe Nanda, to push the government to ratify the 1951 convention. But most of the ASEAN states, they do not ratify the convention because of the background and the history of the 1951 of the convention, that it was created because of the situation of the World War II, I think. So, and then the Korean applied the 1951 convention through the Immigration Control Act. And we also get some information that the private donors in Korea are trying to give more contribution to support the work of United Nations Commission on Refugees. So thank you very much for Professor Sriwa. The session, and we will have a coffee break for 15 minutes. So please give applause again for our session. Thank you very much. Good morning.
Thank you. Before we leave here to have a coffee break, I'll make an announcement in terms of schedule of our program. Actually, we aim to have a 2 more session after a coffee break. But unfortunately, the delegate from Taiwan and also Philippines are not able to join with us.
So I'm going to merge the two sessions as one, so that the next session will be last session followed by the method. So that I believe that the whole program can be finished before one, so that we can have lunch. Then the participant can have the afternoon time for their own pleasure. So that's the rescheduling of the program. No, we do have the complete ready now, and the next session will start 11th and as scheduled, and then
will be corrected.
Then another session that and the one we start our lunch. So whole program will be the 5 copies there. See you in the next session and enjoy your coffee break. Thank you very much.